All right, and we're now recording. Hello, this is White Lotus of Light interview series, and today I'm very honored to have as my guest Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, who is indeed the great granddaughter of who I consider to be top 3 presidents of all time in US history, Dwight D. Eisenhower. I think one of the most principled, amazing men ever to hold the office of the presidency. And Laura herself is an incredibly accomplished woman. And I'm just going to go ahead and read Laura's bio real quick. Laura Eisenhower is a global alchemist, researcher, and medical and intuitive astrologist. She is internationally acclaimed speaker who has presented her work worldwide. Laura is the great-granddaughter of President Dwight David Eisenhower, and she reveals exo-political information about his administration that has been largely held in secrecy. She is considered by many to be one of North America's leading researchers on health, exo-politics, alchemy, metaphysics, and galactic history. Laura works to free us from the 3D holographic time loop, false archonic systems, and military-industrial complex, and exposes hidden agendas so we can take our power back. Feeling a calling regarding her mission since she was a child, she has gained incredible insight through her wilderness adventures, psychic development, and has been connecting major dots about how to guide us into higher earth energies. She has a deep understanding of Gaia Sophia and our divine blueprint and how they connect to the Venus transits, earth grids, global alchemy, DNA, and ET races. Her passion is to inspire unity consciousness and bring us back to the 0-point unified field, the totality of our divine powers. And yeah, wow, what a incredible background, what incredible gifts that you're bringing to bear. Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. Oh, it sounds like you're muted.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Ian.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I want to ask you, Laura, today we'll touch on some of the alien secret space program kind of stuff that everybody wants to hear. But today I really want to focus on having our viewers get to know you better and get to know like what has kind of shaped you and brought you to this point in your life where you're doing this tremendous work that takes such courage and bravery to put yourself out there and to have these positions, these really iconoclastic positions that are really against the mainstream. And so I imagine, Laura, for you to be in this place, and I read a little bit in your bio about having a calling since you were a child, what was the most important thing or perhaps theme in your childhood that really helped you, or maybe young adulthood, that really helped shape who you are today? Was there sort of like a watershed moment, or was it more of a theme and like a journey? Was there something to where suddenly you were just like, you know what, I'm going to go off in this direction that is going to leave a lot of people baffled and is going to really inspire other people who are ready to hear your message?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say it's more of a journey. I've always been talking about kind of this out there stuff, and it really wasn't penetrating people's ears. Very often the conversation would get changed or it would be sort of laughed at. And it's kind of like, it's very easy for people to throw people into categories. Oh, that's new agey, or oh, that's woo, or this, or it's this or that, or this or that. And I don't think a lot of the people that I was trying to talk to really understood or understand the depth of my experiences and the things coming through and the research that backs up a lot of the stuff that I say. And that, of course, has been a work in progress, and a little bit easier since I've been doing presentations because I have real data to back up the stuff that I say, getting to know other whistleblowers and just, researchers and meeting a lot of people in my travels. It's given a lot more credibility and validity to a lot of the stuff I've been talking about for a really long time. I was talking about this kind of stuff in high school. A lot of the stuff that I do presentations about, I mean, I was writing about and processing in like my later teenage years, I would probably say. And stuff was coming in as a child. I was trying to sort that out. And then when I started to kind of write about it or journal about it, I was like, oh, wow. I mean, I actually can express my thoughts because I never did well in school. What's that?
Were you channeling this information, or do you mean sources were coming to you?
No, it was more just coming in, and I wouldn't say I was channeling any being or entity. It felt just like my own direct connect with spirit and higher self. But I mean, Eisenhower was always around, and he was always kind of helping me. Seemed like there was just his presence like always there. So when I started to write about it, I realized I could articulate my thoughts, even though I never got good grades in school and I was considered maybe like having learning disabilities. I just didn't pay attention. I just couldn't focus. But I was always thinking and processing. And so when I actually started to write and I saw or realized the stuff coming through me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I kind of like know what I'm talking about when it comes to this, as far as the clarity for me. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to vibe with somebody else, but a lot, ended up coming through, and it's a lot of what I present about. So things around Christ Sophia, just the whole underworld journey, things connected to our DNA, things connected to our ancient history, and all this preparation that seemed to be taking place for this particular role I was going to be playing in this ascension window period. And so, yeah, I've been talking about it and went to high school in the Washington, D.C. area. And it was just sort of not being taken seriously at all. And then I just went into the wilderness, did wilderness courses and have a background in that. And I really excelled in it and got really top grades and in the sciences that I did. And it really hit me, I think, the most defining moment as far as beginning to move in this direction, which wasn't so much about, let's talk about disclosure, let's talk about ETs, even though a lot of that was coming in.
Right.
Starting off with just seeing just kind of rumors and things floating around, like even in Weekly World magazine about Eisenhower meeting with ETs. And then it brought me back to a lot of the different things that were kind of coming in that were beyond this world when I was younger. So I've been connecting dots with a lot of different times in my life that stuff was coming in till I, finally have been able to integrate it a lot more together. But what really kind of hit me was in these courses connected to the wilderness stuff. I was taking microbiology and the study of, disease. And I was already studying astrology and getting sort of into the medical astrology, Chinese medicine, and all these things related to the fact that we're elemental beings. And, there's a much, much larger picture, what one would say is metaphysics or something more esoteric related to our physical health, right? So when I was taking this course and looking through the books and meeting, like we had an AIDS panel, like 5 people had come and sat on a panel. I was just really getting intuitive hits about just a lot of the dark agendas, a lot of the way society steers things in order to create an energetic that makes one vulnerable to things that compromise them and make them sick. And I was just seeing a much larger picture. And I would tell my teacher, I'm like, to me, these people aren't sick. And, and all these terminologies with this illness stuff. I mean, I was just seeing that, isn't a big portion of it like initiations, and that there's something about energy patterning and frequency behind it that makes us vulnerable to some of these things, and that there's other ways and more holistic ways to heal it. So I was getting all these downloads and all these downs. So I went into herbology, and I ended up running an organic shipping and delivery company for chemically sensitive people. And I was just really passionate about nutrition, herbs, healing, wellness, and energetic healing, metaphysics. I had already pretty much memorized the whole I Ching. So, it wasn't like I couldn't read a book. I was just like shuffling my cards, working with the I Ching all throughout high school, to the point where I didn't even need the book anymore. And there's 64 hexagrams, and it's a pretty big book, but I did it so repetitively, and I learned so much from that as well. So going into that direction, being the wilderness thing, it really brought me to a very grounded place. Being a very out there kid, it really, helped ground me a lot more. So it really started off with all of that. And then when I got recruited to go off planet, all the suspicions about the dark agendas and everything that I was sort of running into that some might deem conspiracy, I was like, no, I'm seeing this firsthand. And I'm experiencing it firsthand, which really helped me to sort out information from disinformation and to have like a real tangible experience instead of just, I'm just going to regurgitate, what I heard on the internet. And then I started working with people that were directly involved as well. But I think the nutritional part of it, because most of my presentation, not the nutritional, but the body, mind, spirit, multidimensional nature of all that we are, the whole rebuilding of our DNA template, and learning really deeply about that over the course of many years has been my bigger passion. The exopolitical stuff is a part of it, because it's all a part of that greater picture we need to understand in order to reach these higher states. We need to understand the dark agendas, the targetings, the things that they hide in secrecy. But the main body of my presentations is much more about our human potential and ways to heal, ways to overcome all this stuff. And I touch upon all this, other kind of crazy darker stuff as part of sort of this agreement to do some things that Eisenhower wasn't able to do, and also to protect his legacy, because there's a lot of blame and targeting and rewriting of history that I've been really wanting to like kind of rescue from being lost. And I know I'm answering kind of in a big way, but I would say it's always been there since childhood. I've been trying to communicate it. When I began to write it, I almost had my book completely ready and done, and it got, long story, it got pretty much destroyed. I couldn't put it out. But when I really realized I was able to put articulation to the things coming through, I really kind of got to know myself a little bit more and what my mission meant. If I didn't write it down, it was just like I was just swirling in the like I was all over the place. Seriously, all over the place.
So I do want to ask you, since you brought it up, I mean, it is one of the things that's the most jaw-dropping, I think, probably for most people, of the many jaw-dropping things that you've experienced or had as downloads from your higher self. Can you talk in a little more detail? I want to ask you some more questions about you, but I know that some of the viewers are going to want at least a little taste of classic Laura's like exo-politics stuff. And so can you tell a little bit more for viewers? And I actually don't know the story about your being recruited for the secret space program.
Well, it wasn't like secret space program, like a 20 and back type deal, or these kind of stories that we hear about from other people. It was to be a permanent colonist on Mars. And it kind of makes sense because I think they definitely knew that this New World Order agenda was rolling out, and I was well aware of it at the time. I didn't know what part they played in all of it, though. And I think it was a real mixed bag, you know, these recruiters, between those that were very well-intentioned. And just to kind of like start, basically what happened was...
What year?
Well, it was 2006. But I felt this energy on me like throughout my life, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. One would call it psychotronic weaponry, or like some sort of hidden targeting, now that it's a little bit more known and other people have come forward. But there was always like this attention on me, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And something constantly trying to sabotage the things I was trying to create. And I was like, well, maybe I'm just a screw up, and maybe that's me. And so of course I first kind of turned to myself, and like, I'm all about doing the inner work. And like, I ended up going to a clairvoyant institute, though. I was going to go to an herbal school, even though I still studied the herbal thing, but they didn't have enough participants. And I ended up bumping into this clairvoyant institute where they're like, immediately said like, Eisenhower's here. They didn't know my last name because I guess he was walking with me, or he was with me. And they were very clairvoyant, because the fact that they picked up on that. And I know I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but they kind of helped me to understand this weaponry and what I was up against. And they were kind of like, holy crap, you know? And they gave a lot of validation to the things that I couldn't get other people to understand. So I just said, forget it. I'm not even going to bother trying to explain to people, or even the stuff that's coming in about what's really going on in the world. Just been kind of one of those people easy to just kind of brush off and laugh at. But anyway, so they noticed all this stuff, and they were really helping me, but then it just wasn't enough. And I basically gave up, and I was like, whatever that control force is, whatever this is, which they helped me to understand. They said, there's this weaponry on you. And they said, it's not because there's anything that you did. They're like, it's because of your light. It's because of your mission. It's because of what you're here to do. They're trying to steer you someplace else. So I'm like, okay, well, can't seem to get rid of it. So I'll just let myself go where they want me to go and see where this is going to take me, so I can confront it firsthand. So I ended up moving back to Washington from California, because I mean, I've moved all over the country. I've lived in so many places. It's crazy. Finally, all right, I'm going off on tangents here, but so I go back to Washington, D.C. area where my mom lives, and I end up in her basement. I'm a mother of twins who are probably about 6 years old, and no stable relationship to really like help with that. So that was just hard, period, on its own. And I'm just kind of like on my own, taking care of the kids, you know, just kind of in a downstairs apartment sort of deal. And I decide to go to this gathering, and I guess they tracked me because somebody approached me at the gathering that kind of hit it off with me. And so we're kind of like hanging out, we're forming sort of a relationship and friendship, and he was very, very familiar. And so anyway, we started seeing each other, and he would go to DC and go to these meetings and then stop by and visit me. And he started to tell me what these meetings were about. And these were secret meetings having to do with going to Mars. And it had to do with this, you know, group of individuals connected to, actually what I found out, MJ12. They're connected to and have their hands on ET technology. And some of them are very, very dark. So when I started to get the names, I couldn't really address them directly. It was always through him. But when I started to gather the names, I started to do some real investigation later on down the road. At first, I was just like, oh, this is, is this probably going to be something known to the public? I mean, it was more like a hidden secret deal of, we're going to go to Mars and we're going to land there. Target date is 2012, which was 6 years from the date that I met this person. And it was like, okay, well, I have an open mind to it as far as like his involvement, but like I have a mission here on Earth, and I was prepared since a young age. And I had, that direct connect with my higher self, but there was also very benevolent beings that were helping me to understand some things about the future that had to do with timelines. And so anyway, I was like, well, I have a mission here on Earth, and I'm like, I don't think anything can tear me away from it. I don't think anybody can convince me that it's a good idea to go off planet. I mean, now that I see the craziness of the world, I'm just like, but we're going to go and explore, the stars. We're star seeds, of course, but I didn't want to do it with them. I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. So I'm learning about the people that he's working with. Some seem okay, and others are very connected to dark weaponry, and they have very bizarre sort of backgrounds. Because they didn't want to talk to me firsthand. That was very suspicious, and it just didn't seem safe. And I had dreams, really, really lucid dreams that were kind of guiding me to make the right choice. But they were basically saying, you have a choice. And in one of the dreams, the choice that I made was to stay on Earth after I'd already been taken up in this ship. And it was very lucid. And when I made the choice, I was dropped from the ship and I landed in the ocean, and I could feel the coldness of the ocean. And all of a sudden the planetary alignments began to happen, and all sorts of things began to happen. And it was like, the indication was that I made the right choice not going. And then I ended up telling him, and it was just a big mess, because they were trying to use him as bait, because they had targeted him previously. And he was under some sort of MK Ultra, some sort of weird thing, because he definitely was like getting phone calls and disappearing and not remembering. And from what I've learned and what I've seen, it's very much one of those kind of deals where, you enter the phone, you get a code or some kind of activation. It's like, what just happened to the dude I was hanging out with, because he's not the same person anymore. And I'm like, and he had a handler, and he was talking about his handlers, and he's like, they want you to have one. And I'm like, no, I'm like, no way. So I refused the whole thing from the get-go, but I mean, I still loved him, right? And I was trying to say what I was seeing and how worried I was, and he wouldn't have it. He didn't want to listen about it. So I eventually got away. It's a really long story. It was not easy to break free of all that. But that's kind of the gist of it. And it was to be a permanent colonist, but who knows? What they do is they convince you. This is their tactic with me. They convince you, oh, we'll give you this leadership position, and that whole like, you've been chosen for this reason, to kind of make you feel special. And I'm just like, just cut the bull. I'm like, I know the games that these kind of people play, so I wasn't going to have it. And I saw through it, and the targeting was unbelievable. The targeting was unbelievable when I began to refuse, because I was basically also breaking their ability to continue to track me or try and shove me on this timeline or agenda I didn't want to go on. And not to say that they don't still monitor on some level. I don't know if they put a tracking device somewhere on me, but or they just can get information through the computer. Maybe I wrote somewhere I was going to this gathering, and they were like, all right, go meet her there. Because anyway, 7 months into the relationship, he said to me, I didn't meet you in the organic way, like you thought. That like, oh, we just ran into each other and formed this relationship, and oh, you're just connected to this Mars trip. It's all hush hush. And I'm like trying to figure out why. And he's like, they sent me on a mission. You are a mission. They assigned me to you to bring you into this. And what I found out later is they used looking glass technologies to locate us. And we had past life together, and we had an affinity and a love connection in a past life. And that's why it was so easy to just kind of be like, and so he was dealing with a lot of abduction stuff, but we're talking more military, more MyLab related stuff, because the people, this group of individuals that pulled him in are very connected with that, like I said, and there's a relationship with MJ12, but he was bleeding every night out of the, where, and it was just like, they were doing something to him, like, and I just finally, ended up, getting away. And it took a bit to resettle. And actually me becoming a public person ended up giving me more protection. When I was all alone in it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it kind of like pulled people out of the woodworks, and people are, like, oh, wow, meet Andrew Basiago, who served time on Mars or is a part of Project Pegasus. And so a lot of the secret space whistleblowers, really validated that there's colonies there. So when I was talking about this back in 2010, when I became a public person, and I'm talking about, Mars colonies and being recruited to go to Mars, and people thought I was nuts. So many people ended up coming like into my life that were like, yep, it's true. We were 20 back or in the secret space program. We served on Mars. Randy Kramer, Michael Reif, Andrew Basiago, Tony Rodriguez. I mean, the numbers are pretty long. I mean, there's a lot of people that can verify that, and there absolutely are colonies there. I don't know what position. It was too much of a risk. There are better ways that they could have gotten me there if it was a really good idea. The main dudes could have like really sat down with me and talked to me. And it's just, I didn't like the whole using my partner, abusing him with these technologies or whatever they were doing. Because
absolutely.
And trying to get me through that way. I mean, how could I go along with it? If it was really, really necessary and it was really a benevolent mission, I think it would have played out completely differently. But I know that I was meant to stay here on Earth. And so I do all I can to just spread information and awareness. So
that's awesome. Wow. What an incredible story. So I want to ask a real quick extemporaneous question. I noticed you have a labyrinth tattoo on your arm, and the labyrinth has a lot of layers of meaning and depth and stuff. What does that tattoo mean to you? And I mean, it's so prominent. It's such a beautiful sacred symbol, the divine feminine. I'm just curious, like, what does that tattoo mean to you?
Well, it's just funny, like the story surrounding when I actually got it, because I was writing about like the underworld, and I was really connecting into a lot of the archetypes and really kind of understanding it and how it corresponds with the Venus transits and things in our ancient history. And I was really, really aware of a lot of the archetypes, especially like Ariadne, and who's very connected to the Labyrinth, and just the whole concept of going into the underworld, that initiation of going into the underworld to reconnect with the creative cauldron, to understand that it's like the womb and it births, and it's the creative part of ourselves that gives birth, right? The good darkness. The underworld part of it is when we're facing a lot of shadow elements and maybe hidden controllers that are trying to tell us, like hook into us without maybe us realizing. So when we go into sort of the underworld, we kind of have to face difficult aspects of ourselves, things that maybe would be otherwise unconscious. So it helps us to look at our behaviors, look at our ancestral patterns, look at our triggers. And so I'm very comfortable with sort of these underworld journeys. Some of them have been like too long, but it's just like, am I ever gonna like get out of this? And a lot of what my first book, which never got out, was really about this. And when I read some of the pieces, I mean, I'm in a completely different place, because I was really describing it from like really feeling like in the darkest of the dark, and like, really understanding as well, not so much through just reading, but experiencing it, just what it really means to go in there and find that light of wisdom. And so the archetype of the crone, amplifying the light within to be able to navigate the darkness. So when I was going through all this crazy stuff with the targeting and trying to mother twins without much money, and people are like, aren't you an Eisenhower? Don't you have a trust fund? It's like, no. They're like, then your family, what, did they ostracise you? Is that why you don't have a trust fund? I'm like, no, I'm very close to my family. Eisenhower he's not a part of the Illuminati family.
He's corrupt. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I'm not like, it's not a family of banksters. We're not sitting on millions. And that's so funny about like going to family gatherings, because it's just like humble little cabin and, no impressive vehicles, just very down to earth. I'm not saying any of that stuff is really bad, but
the proof is in the pudding. The very fact that your family is like middle class and like, like regular people goes to show that Eisenhower was not corrupt. He couldn't have been. If he had done some evil agenda stuff, he would have got paid. They pay well. And in fact, he resisted, lowering the tax rate and a lot of the other stuff that ended up really causing a lot of the problems. And if Eisenhower hadn't stopped that say the tax rate had dropped to Reagan levels in the 50s, how different would things be now? How much worse would they be? Because when Reagan, and then even in the 70s, there was some court case when those tax codes changed. That's really when you started to see the income gap and the extreme abuses by the ultra wealthy really accelerate. And so your great grandfather stop that from happening decades earlier. And imagine that all that stuff had happened and the internet didn't come right on the heels of it. Like, thank God for the internet, you know?
Yeah.
So that,
well, just to finish about the labyrinth.
oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a point where I realized I was finally kind of, you know, getting out of this sort of darkness. You know, I'd done so much inner work, and I was like, you know, I had to grow up real fast, you know, to be a mother of twins. It's like, you know, I was like starting off with 2 off the bat. I'm like, I haven't even really, I mean, I have like maturity, but I'm like, I'm still kind of a crazy kid. I'm, you know, going to rock concerts all the time, living on the road, living, you know, out of vehicles. And I'm like, but anyway, it was the greatest gift ever to have these boys. It was amazing. But there was a period in which I was like, oh, like I'm out of the underworld, or I've like anchored the womb energy within myself, or just whatever it all was. And I'm like, I have to write this down. And I'm like, it's the labyrinth. I've been through this maze and this initiation. And I just felt myself like able to come out of it, that no matter who didn't understand me, no matter how little assistance I might've gotten, no matter how dark and sort of underworldy and dark night of the soulish it was, yeah, there was always that acknowledgement of God or Christ and the Sophia energy and the mother energy. And it was always there, kind of cheering me on, or just like, you know, we're not going to be able to, you know, make ourselves fully known to you. It's going to be really, really uncomfortable, but we're here, kind of thing. So, yeah, like coming out the other end, I just knew it was something that had to be done. And it corresponds with doing other kind of energetic work that relates to stargates and things that I can't really explain, but when I went to the Clairvoyant Institute, they helped me to understand. And it was just like gone through that initiation. And then, yeah, I mean, you see this in like the Minoan and the, you know, Crete cultures, the Hopis. I mean, Can
we see it just for a second? Can you show it? Yeah. Yeah.
So it was like medicine. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to wake up. I'm like, I have to, it's like, so to me, my tattoos are like medicine. And like, they marked like some very, very significant passages. And when I was able to anchor it and ground it, it was like, okay, I'm acknowledging that, because I want to live mindfully and consciously. I want to know what that was all about. Not just like, oh, you know, some people run right for a pharmaceutical. Oh, I'm depressed. No, you're going through an initiation. And part of it is a little bit of sadness, depression, anger, maybe confusion, bewilderment. I mean, all these uncomfortable things, but we're taught in this society that, oh, that needs to be medicated. There's something wrong with you. So I'm like, right, I'm going to have nothing to do with that. That's why I lived on the road, to escape all that projection and to just really honor it, instead of like act like it's not my friend or something's wrong with me. I wanted to just give it the love and respect that it deserved. And that's what really began to unlock this greater mission, which I now pull into presentations.
That's awesome. And, you know, thinking of the archetype of the labyrinth and going through like all these challenges and dark night of the soul, I can't help but think of the incredible Jim Henson, David Bowie film from the 80s. And in particular, the scene where I forget the name of that amazing actress, but where she is confronting David Bowie, the Goblin King, who's this like illusionist who's been manipulating her and in a way initiating her and bringing her back to her power, sort of by torturing her psychologically in a literal labyrinth. And at the end, she goes, Goblin King, you have no power over me. And when she realizes that he has no power over her, literally the entire illusion of the entire thing crumbles apart. And she comes back into her full power and is like then back in the normal world. And it was a literal dark night. There was a storm, you know, in the film and in the real world, where before she goes into the world of the labyrinth. And so it's interesting because these archetypes come down and echo down through the centuries. You know, Jim Henson was a transcendental meditation guy, so he really understood those deeper levels. David Bowie was the head of the OTO, the Ordo Templar Orientalis, which is the Order of the Golden Dawn, essentially. So fascinating stuff. So my next question on the docket for you, Laura, are we'll get into the timelines thing later, but I'm curious right now, what are you learning about? What are you really spending time that you're wanting to learn more up on because you think it's something that is really important to you in some way? What's your kind of, I know you constantly are learning. That's something I do know about you. And What's really captured your attention right now for that you're wanting to dig deeper?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's like dot connecting. A lot of it is bringing life to the things that have been coming in. Because I find like just a lot just ends up, kind of coming in, and I learn from that. It's like, oh, okay. And I know it's not really a channel, because there's no entity or being that I'm talking to. I see it and feel it as myself. Even though there has been experiences of, meeting guides and some other benevolent beings. What I guess really like learning about, I mean, I'm always like loving just like things surrounding like herbs and nutrition and, different kinds of supplements, really cool, kind of things. I have so many, but that's always been there. So that's nothing new. Things that can help one to maintain emotional and mental balance and clarity in these times where, sometimes it's just like the overwhelm is too much. So I'm always sort of upgrading, like, okay, I need this, or this herb would be perfect, and I've got this, and I'm all stocked up and stored up. And, I've always worked closely with the land. So, raising chickens and just learning about just different ways to like homestead and have a permaculture garden, it's all kind of like down to having a real experience and a real relationship, with Mother Earth, which I've always nurtured, but this is just going to be something more permanent and something that I've always wanted to do. So that's kind of me in the personal. As far as like information that I'm gravitating towards in my presentations, I always sort of upgrade things and want people to really, understand the AI, understand this agenda, understand these technologies. So I go into technologies that were put in place thousands of years ago and things connected to the planetary grid network that took place thousands of years ago that have put us to where we are today and what that means and the different, timeline stuff. And mostly how it corresponds with frequency and our DNA and what our junk DNA truly is, which I've learned holds different harmonic universes. And, in these other harmonic universes that we used to dwell, all sorts of things happen, of course, that dropped us into this lower density, exploded planets, hybridization, manipulation of incarnate consciousness, and just the fallen angelics and, all that greater history. So I've always been kind of putting those dots together, but I like my focus, and what I love to just bring to the table is us understanding what we're made of, what's being targeted, and how are they trying to, stunt our growth. So it's not just in this window. I mean, they've been doing this for a really, really long time. So when I talk about the galactic history, I'm doing it in reference to how our DNA is functioning at such a limited level. And so technologies like the Saturn moon matrix, the Nephilim reversal grid, the Nibirian diatic crystal grid, and all these things that create reversals or a bunch of sort of artificial realities are simulations that fill up this or take over this junk DNA to the point where something's running us unconsciously without us realizing it, so that we can switch it back on. So how do we switch it back on? And then I, really go into, ways that we can switch it back on through really understanding what it is beyond maybe, the scientific terminologies. I do include that though with really great sources, people, that are very renowned in their field, and connecting those dots with understanding that these higher harmonic universes hold different stages and levels of love, which is all about the integration of polarity within our own being, so that our energetic circulation allows us to clear out our chakra system and switch on these dormant strands of DNA. And it's about alchemical marriage, hierogamic union, and just really illuminating the divine blueprint, which to me, we're going from a very imbalanced relationship. We're tied into the matrix. It's like having a narcissistic partner, something out of balance, something abusive, right? So in our own personal lives, we've all had experiences of maybe not having the best partners that really messed us up or traumatized us or hurt us, or it wasn't a fair relationship. It wasn't a true relationship, and it wasn't being treated like the sacred union relationship that like one would have wanted, it's like, and then someone's like, oh, fairy tales don't exist. It's like, yeah, they do. So I'm like wanting to bring that back by helping people to connect with that inner love story, and how when we rebalance, we break the connection with the Saturn moon matrix and the patriarchal programs and all the things that have targeted both men and women, so that we can live on an authentic level and live the real relationship with creation, which is a beautiful relationship. I mean, earth, spirit, cosmos, and just our own true 12-strand and beyond DNA template is the most amazing thing to reclaim and empower. So that's always been my focus, but I always take it to the next level. And then what are all the things? What are all the things that are making it so difficult? Things that happened during Second World War, things that happened billions of years ago, you know, and just give like all the different parts and pieces. And then of course, this slow grooming process that's Project Mockingbird and Paperclip that has indoctrinated people into literally handing over this opportunity and giving their power away in a time where we can actually reclaim these treasures and advance ourselves in ways that we haven't been able to for a while, because we're at the end of this 26,000 year cycle. So I'd like people to know, so that it's like, this is an ascension window period. This is not a time to, you know, and even if sickness is a part of it, that's a part of a greater initiation if we can process it appropriately. And that's why when I was talking about Dark Night of the Soul, you know, I can process grief, or what one might call depression or anger, in a different way than from a psychologist's mouth. I can process when my body's sick. I've had pneumonia before. I've gotten really sick before. I can process it if I can let it bring me closer to myself instead of further away. And it's going to make me further away from myself if I only listen to the doctor. And if I only listen to something outside of myself, then I'm allowing my intuition to atrophy. And it's going to get more and more atrophied over the course of time, to the point where I'm going to have no internal guidance, no ability to, you know, go for the holistic approaches and the things that will actually serve me. And I'm basically saying, okay, you own me. I don't have a consciousness, and I don't have an intelligence anymore. And I'm so surprised to see so many people willingly do that right now.
I agree. And that kind of leads me to the next question. I'm going to do a little bit of setup on this one. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see, probably not. I just put up recently a video on the presentation of the Yuga systems. I actually did it as part of our mutual friend, Sasha. Oh gosh, is it Benedetti? Is that how you say your last name? Or Bendetti, maybe? We did the astrology roundtable some time ago. She's the one, she does a lot of work on Venus cycles, but she did an astrology conference, and I did a presentation on the Hindu Yuga system. And I'm just going to do a screen share real quick. And so you kind of alluded to this when you talked about a 26,000 year cycle. And it's from the precession of the equinoxes. It takes one complete 26,000 year cycle for the planets at the autumnal and vernal equinox points to move through, or I mean, for our planet to move through the various signs. And so the time period that you're talking about is to go all the way from, let's say we're just right now on the cusp of Pisces and Aquarius, to go all the way from here all the way around takes 26,000 years. That's what Laura was just talking about. And right now, I'm going to show you this Hindu concept of the yugas. Let's see if, can you see that, Laura, that wheel? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was a period of time where the golden age existed, and that happened back when we talk about the Ice Age civilizations, Atlantis in particular, and a full cycle before that. Many people say Lemuria took place during that golden age. And then you have a Treta Yuga where it's a silver age, and it's during this period of time the final fall of Atlantis happened, but things were still very high. And you get things like the incredible temple work in Egypt and India and elsewhere as the Atlantean diaspora, or it might have been called the Empire of Rama in India. But this super high-tech prior Ice Age civilization had these incredible temples that were built worldwide. Baalbek in Lebanon. There was a giant temple underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, even before Solomon's temple, according to my prior guest, Grandmaster of the Templar, Timothy Hogan. So all those amazing temples were built during this period of time where they still had some of that high technology, but it was fading as our consciousness was becoming denser. Because also during this golden age, it seems that we were more embodied on multiple planes like you described, that we were in touch with those higher levels of DNA strands, that we were experiencing reality on sort of more dimensions, that we were interacting with other beings at different vibrations. And as you go down through the cycle and reality gets denser and consciousness lowers, you get finally down to the Bronze Age, which is really when a lot of the tail end of the Bronze Age is when really a lot of the nasty stuff in the world starts to happen. And that's at the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And there's a descending Kali Yuga and then an ascending Kali Yuga. And right now we're on the cusp of coming out of the Kali Yuga. And the Kali Yuga is a period in time in which things are just very warlike, things are very materialist, and everybody's kind of missing the mark. And we are at, thank God, the tail end of that. And I'm just going to put up a picture of Kali. This kind of gives you a sense. You see in the background, there's all the fighting, the slaughter. Kali is just reigning supreme. It's just death and destruction. The deeper meaning of Kali is to show us this dark side of ourselves. The Kali Yuga is really a sort of 4,320 year initiation cycle for humanity to set off the pressure that causes the creation of the diamond of humanity for us to evolve into this next period of growth. And that's that period of time you're talking about. We're also at the end of what's called a fourth turning. There's this man named Strauss, and he had a partner, and they wrote this thing about that there's 80-year cycles that repeat in America. The first one starts the Revolutionary War, and then it ends with the beginning of the Civil War. And then the Civil War starts the next one, and then it ends with the beginning of World War II. And then World War II it begins the next one. And then now we're just in the tail end of ending it. And we're coming to that crisis period like we had during World War II and the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, except there's cycles within cycles now. We have the Great Year is changing astrologically. We have the Kali Yuga ending, and we have this fourth turning all happening virtually simultaneously, which brings me to my question. Sorry to be such a setup, but this is a big question. There's a lot of discussion of this bifurcation of timelines. Now, I've been hearing about this concept from many, many sources, people that I deeply respect and admire for years now. And in a way, I'm seeing it already in the sense of I can talk to people, and even if I send them to a website of a company where a company says, this thing is experimental and hasn't been approved, something for talking about passports here in the future for that sort of thing, that you can send them to the company webpage and they'll go, no, the Mockingbird media told me something else. And I'm like, but it's right there. It's to the point to where I feel like I'm already living in a separate reality from a lot of people. And yet I'm curious, is your belief on this bifurcation of timelines, which to me is a transhumanist dark agenda moving towards, I think, the gray alien timeline where humans modify themselves to become something else entirely and then send themselves back in time to get DNA and eggs and sperm from us healthy, normal humans. And there's also the timeline where humans continue this organic, everything you've been talking about, connecting back with the earth, this holistic, natural, spiritual evolution timeline. And that's the main timeline. That's the timeline that goes along with universal law. And so I'm curious, how do you see that timeline? Do you see it as a literal thing? Do you see it as a metaphorical thing? Do you see it as an experiential thing? Or how do you see that?
Probably a bit of all of it. I mean, I was talking about DNA a little bit earlier, and it's so much to try and articulate the fullness of what I pulled together, because it's just obviously they're couple hour long productions, but our DNA is connected to the planetary grid network. So if we're only functioning at a small capacity because things have been in reversals, because we've been so linked into the system, the matrix, whatever family we were born into, whatever culture we were born into, and just how we have a hard time as humans maintaining sovereignty because of all these different influences. As we are in the awakening process and we begin to switch this dormant DNA on, it corresponds with the planetary grid network and the stargates and rebooting it so that it's the 12 sphere. It's the true tree of life instead of the artificial tree of life that has an overlay of like 10 spheres, which is draconian, that has put things in a way that when we're born through osmosis, we pick up these things that naturally almost digress us on a consciousness level instead of support our development. So it takes a very brave and strong soul to say, wait a second, I know there's more to reality than what I've gotten in the school systems and A lot of people who call themselves maybe a black sheep or recognize that they are on a starseed mission might, find themselves pulling away from it all pretty easily. What a person might deem, oh, you're just rebellious or this or that. And so there is already a divide between those that are seeking truth, those who embody truth, those that are open enough to explore areas that others don't want to touch because it's not in the news and it's not in the school books. There's already a sort of vibrational mismatch. Now we're seeing it on a much larger scale because of what is being pushed on us. So those trustworthy people that, kind of had a identity within the system, maybe thinking that they weren't as owned by the system as they actually are, or not owned, but influenced. Because there's a lot of like really talented artists and really intelligent people that have fallen right into this trap that they're throwing out, that I was very surprised. I'm like, I thought you were rebellious and, like
Starhawk
kind of person.
Starhawk, that's a great pagan leader of the 80s who is feminist and anti-corporate all the way. She's going along with it. Jello Biafra, the dead Kennedy's original punk guy, anti-authority, it's going right along with it. No, it's astonishing. And then there's people that you would never, ever, ever think would be on the same side as you. Someone who's skeptical of it. And this is a person who almost always goes along with the mainstream. LeBron James is questionable about, he won't talk about it, which means he isn't.
Yeah.
That's amazing because he always defends China and all this other stuff. And even so it's creating some weird circles of agreement,
I know. And I don't like to be like, oh, anti this or for this, or this is right or this is wrong. Everybody ultimately is going to make their own decision. Exactly. But where is the free mind? Where's the sovereignty? Where's the ability to see the nefarious activities? Where is your intuition? I mean, how can people be trusting some of these characters that are pushing this stuff? Where have you been, guys? Why haven't you done your research? So that's a little concerning because it's not coming from the right sources.
Right.
And anyway, there's a lot of amazing doctors and experts that have been censored as well. And I don't know why that's not a concern for them. Why isn't that upsetting people? I mean, I just interviewed Matt Belair. He's brilliant and he's just such a benevolent person and he's been censored everywhere. And I wouldn't even say he's that controversial. He's super high vibe. But anyway, that's beside the point. So there's always been sort of a split underway and sort of this tandem kind of like artificial timeline, organic ascension timeline. And in our lives, we might experience a little bit of both. We might find ourselves in situations or jobs where we're really kind of feeling pulled into it, but it doesn't feel right. So we pull ourselves back out and we say, hey, I just can't do this. I've quit so many jobs. I'm like, I'm not going to compromise myself. It's not worth it. I'd rather, that's why I always chose being broke. Was better because I don't really feel broke. To me, abundance is so beyond currency, and it has to do with our spirit nature and our manifestation abilities. So the path of those who I think are really sovereign and are free spirits are more in alignment with getting those activations, getting more in touch with those greater spiritual abilities to the point where the system can't manipulate them, and cause them to compromise themselves because they're willing to do something for that paycheck, or it's worth doing it because they still want to travel. It's like not really realizing what you're compromising. And people do that in relationships. It's not maybe true, authentic love. It's more like, well, what bartering or what can I get out of this? What's in it for me? And I'm willing to do this, even if it's not good, for the sake of maybe getting that. And then you find yourself wanting to run and get away from it all. So anyway, I just see a very distinct difference. And I'm not saying that everybody that is making one decision that it's as black and white as that. I think there's going to be a little bit of time before the full bifurcation takes place, but it's a very different frequency. And so if a person decides, oh, wow, what was I thinking? I want to reverse that decision. Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's going to be a lot harder because of all that goes along with it. And I won't really go into too much detail, of course, because I know, but if they were to say, wow, I read the literature, I researched, they people that have been trying to warn are actually somewhat correct. And I'm not saying all of the information is correct. And I'm not trying to say, all the people over here are right and all the people over there are wrong. But I do feel that people can turn it around. The whole deal is that I mean, if you think about people that have had surgeries and have metal in their body, or people that have experienced abductions and might have an implant, a lot of times you can neutralize those things if your consciousness is vibrating at a certain level. So it's not so much about the machinery part of it. I mean, because we are in a meat suit, a biological vessel that can highly advance itself. It's the most advanced technology that has been mimicked, because, you know, the real Merkaba kind of UFO is part of the consciousness of the pilot. So, I mean, there's something to our capacity to come and go from the physical as we please and travel throughout the multidimensional cosmos, with our own sort of vehicle based in our consciousness. So that's one trajectory, the ascended master path. And then the other one that could, you know, can pull one more into the 5G, the hive mind, the loss of connection with soul, intuition, and all these things, to the point where they're just really being operated by society, and then maybe just totally like the depopulation part of it as well. That's an artificial timeline. Doesn't mean that like it's all doom and gloom though. Like you said, species in the future that have made those choices have agreements, or they kind of force themselves on humans to gain genetic material, to create breeding programs, and all these things to make up for these kind of decisions of allowing themselves to become compromised. So to me, the biggest danger isn't so much the weaponry or the assaults. It's the power of the mind. If you don't have a powerful mind and you're just going to buy into whatever narrative and just not be able to see through the lies, and be easily played, you know, as long as they have their mind, or your mind, they have the rest of you. So if you ended up getting it and you're a highly conscious person and you don't buy into the propaganda and you realize you made a mistake, I don't feel that it's the end for them, because I feel like spirit and consciousness is so much more powerful. But once they own your mind, once they grab you into the narratives, once they really just give you like a false sense of identity with, you know, these false movements that are absolutely hypocritical and absolutely destructive, that literally are creating the divide and bifurcation, because it's very hard to be in the same room with somebody with these different sort of polarized beliefs. And I wouldn't even say the other side necessarily even has to have a belief, but from the standpoint of how they're trying to play us, is you got the conspiracy theorists over here, you got the Black Lives Matter and the leftist sort of thing over here. And it's like, or it has to do with the leaders. And so they want to convince us that it comes down to our ability to be closer, be friends. It comes down to us having to be on the same page for us to be able to even occupy the same space. Well, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I don't care who you voted for. I don't want to polarize myself. I want to love no matter what choices you've made, and there's no judgment on it. But if you're going to be
aggressive
treating of me, you know, and rude to me, that is the reason, not because of your beliefs, not because of who you voted for. Exactly. It's because I don't want to be around anybody who mistreats me and has this sort of kind of thing. I know what works for me. I feel comfortable in the truth that I know. I'd like to share it and be a resource. I don't want to push it on anybody. I'm not saying like it's a right or wrong deal, but like where I draw the line is no mistreatment. Right. If there's not mutual love and respect, that's the reason. And that to me is the bifurcation. There's people that want to stay in that lower level of ego, conflict, hatred, and the polarization, you know, where they hate you if you supported anything that threatens their reality that they are attached to. Whereas the other side doesn't necessarily feel that way.
Right.
I don't hate them for thinking differently.
Right. And it's not even if you necessarily believe the opposite of what they believe or support the opposite canon or whatever. It's actually if you don't completely agree with them down the line on their beliefs, that is perceived as an attack. If you question anything, it's just an immediate, like, everything shuts down. You can't talk anymore. And, you know, I have it to where I can't talk to family members. I had a number of friends that were lost. One of whom I love dearly. I'm trying to become friends with that person again. We had a lot of conflicts about politics, and I actually didn't vote for either candidate. I did it right, and I even told this person, you know, but nope. And it just because I had questions about things, I had questions about legitimacy of certain activities that happen around November. I still have serious questions about that. I'm no longer invested in the outcome, because it's like, if there is going to be any reversal, then that's out of my hands. If there's not going to be, that's out of my hands. And I'm just dealing with what's in front of me right now. And I just wanted to kind of hop on two points that you made about sovereignty and also about what's causing it. And I don't think it's I don't think it's anything to do with intelligence. And it doesn't even seem necessarily linked to spirituality. And that's the one that puzzles me. Although I do find there are far more people who are some vein of spiritual or religious who are sort of on the, I would say, skeptic side, skeptical of the mainstream. I think that would be a good umbrella term, because a lot of these people who are super skeptical, they're anything but conspiracy theorists. It's just they're like, gee, this sounds like the beast system in the Bible, or no, I'm a Hasidic Jew. I will never take that thing. It's against my religious belief. There's lots of religious people. There's lots of traditionalists. There's lots of people who, like Naomi Wolf. I mean, she's a former Clinton staffer. She worked for Bill Clinton, and she stumped for Hillary even in 2016. And she says these passports are tyrannical and horrible. And she's right. During the Bush administration, the Department of Homeland Security hired a KGB person. They said, what's the number one thing you could do to control the population? They said, have an internal passport and checkpoints. Sound familiar? And so the question is then how are really intelligent people, because I know people with master's degrees, with PhDs even, who are just going right along with it. So it can't be intelligence. So what is it? It's two things. One, is the person benefiting from the system? Almost invariably, the answer is yes. I usually don't have to convince people who aren't benefiting from the current system to not go along with it. They're like, well, that system's already screwing me over, so I'm not really invested in it. And they may or may not go along with it. But people who are really doing well in the system, they don't want to rock the boat. So that's a big one. And the other big one is it's kind of like a courage thing, really, because you have to have the courage to go against all this kind of stuff and face a very frightening prospect. Because look, do you want to be right about what you believe to be true? Hell no, neither do I. We want to be wrong. We'd love to be wrong. So what are we just wanting? We're just putting up a straw man to be humiliated and be wrong and be mocked? No, it's because you and I pushed through that discomfort and started to do the research and look at the actual history, look at the financial dealings, look at the political connections. And every time it makes my stomach churn. I just found out I can no longer watch Rick and Morty because the Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland are psychopaths, straight up psychopaths. I discovered stuff in their past. Were they canceled? No. And I have to push through my discomfort around that. That makes me very upset. I was a huge fan of that show. But I'm like, well, it's just part of that whole pedo Hollywood thing, you know, and that's a thing I have to not pretend doesn't exist. I have to push through my discomfort and be aware of that. And so it's getting out of that comfort zone. It's having that courage to face things that are very unpleasant and be an adult and continue to stick with your principles despite tremendous pressure. And you as a public figure get ridiculous amounts of pressure. I've seen the kind of stuff that you've had to go through just in the short period of time that I've known you. And it's incredible. And what makes me sad is when there's ruptures in the truth community or the skeptic community, whatever you want to call it. But the other thing that I want to talk about is that a lot of good-natured people have been tricked. I was tricked. I was talking about before we went on the camera. I went along with things because of personal things that happened had me originally think that this, not so much the pandemic, but the response to the pandemic, that I went along with it and was like, yeah, we've got to lock everything down. We got to do this, that, and the other thing, because I had a family member get very ill. I had some other stuff, and it took me a while to go, oh, wait, this is what it now is. So people can come to those terms if they have the courage to see it. And it's a matter of sovereignty. I had the choice to go along with it. And then when I realized it, rather than doubling down to feel more comfortable, I leaned into that discomfort and I said, look, this is not pleasant, but all the facts are leading me in this direction, no matter how upsetting that is. And so why is there so much pressure? Why not just force people to do it? I mean, outright force at gunpoint. Something about the free will and the sovereignty is key. And that's what this whole revelation of the method thing, all this kind of stuff where the elites kind of put it out there for those with eyes to see. It's partially to program the subconscious, but it's also because when someone goes along willingly from free will, goes along with your agenda, that's infinitely more powerful than someone who's coerced and forced. And on a magical level, it's the only way that you can really get that person to help you project magically what you want into the world. And so we're sovereign beings. And at any moment while we draw breath, we can go, no, I choose love, I choose truth, and I will push through my discomfort, and I will choose to be on the path of the organic timeline. At any moment to our dying breath, we always have free will. And I think it's really important that people remember that. And remember that as we grieve family members who are going along with it, friends who are going along with it, remember, they may come around and it's part of their soul's journey.
And if so, they do come,
oh, go ahead.
Well, it's a part of their soul's journey. Yeah. Well, finish your thought and then I'll.
Oh, I was gonna say, and that, feel free to chime in your thoughts. I was just gonna say, we're probably gonna take a break and end part one, but go ahead and tell me your response to that. I know I said a lot there, so.
Oh no, that's great. Yeah, no, now I'm kind of forgetting what I was gonna say. Well, yeah, they do have a choice to turn around, and when they do, and a person's perspective changes, the things that they draw to themselves change, the synchronicities change, and instead of being sort of like in the system that very much harvests and siphons energy and just kind of like keeps you bound because, like you said, it makes you successful, right? So the people that have gained an identity through the system that has made them successful or given them this strong self-esteem, if they go against it, they might lose all of that. And it's almost like such a scary place for them to go that's why they blow off people and are rude to people who might tell them otherwise, because it's literally, they're afraid of what they might find out because it's too crushing to their identity. But if they do decide to come around, I feel like they're then going to be on a trajectory of synchronicities that will help them to find the right healing technologies, tools and modalities and methods to mitigate some of the damages of what this could potentially do. And the other part of free will too is we have to let go of the fear of death, because this is an initiation period with the conjunctions with Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, as you know, and everything related to Pluto. And we were talking about the underworld and the creative cauldron and the labyrinth. I mean, we're going through sort of like this maze right now as a humanity. And you can't move through the transformation part of a death cycle if you're afraid of the death part, because then all of a sudden you're the gatekeeper to your own ability to rise up and be, a more empowered, soul-centered person, because that's really what Pluto helps us to do. It helps us to rid ourselves of the things that don't serve us. But if they put us in this place of, total fear and fear of death, we're literally putting a prison chamber around the cocoon. And so when it's time to emerge as the butterfly, we can't get out, because we've been convinced that these things that might lead us into a dark night of the soul, fear of illness and this and that, people are taking a route that doesn't let them sort of breathe through and process through, so that we can raise the vibration of what this virus represents. To me, it's part of our evolution to run into these levels of adversity. The question is, what do we do in the face of it? What choices are we making? Do we give our power away, or do we get more connected with, where it's guiding us and where it's, kind of leading us? Because ultimately, I feel illness can lead to a physical upgrade, even though it can kick a person's ass for a while. And I know people who have had the illness, and we talked about this off camera, it can kick your butt for a while, but there are all sorts of ways to rebuild the adrenals and all sorts of herbs and things to bounce back from this kind of stuff. So when we upgrade, we have to move through the gatekeeper area, the seals and the fences. We have to move through some very uncomfortable territory to get to the next level. So they're encouraging people to not seek getting to the next level, but to actually reroute them back into the time loop for another 26,000 cycle to figure it out while, I don't know, we bifurcate someplace else. I know I've been a spirit guide in past lives where I wasn't in the physical, but I was trying to be a guide. And it's like, man, it's really hard to get people's attention. Not, because I just remember like when I was at the Clairvoyant Institute doing some readings, and somebody was actually guiding me into that. I didn't come up with it, but they're like, yeah, as you started taking bodies on Earth, because it's just really hard to get people's attention when you're trying to be a spirit guide. And I mean, think about what our guides, a lot of them have gone through, just trying to keep us all together and going. But
good thing for digital clocks, right? So you can get those angel numbers. They're like, Jesus, we had to go with angel numbers on the clock. What does it take to get your people's attention?
I know.
That's the one I love. I find that to be really resonate with me. Angel numbers is the way my guy gets a hold of me.
Right.
So I think I would like to, if you're okay with it, we could take a break here. I just want to add one little thought to what you said about the virus and upgrades. We now know that long-term memory, or maybe even short-term memory, but something to do with either long or short-term memory or memory in general, is from a virus that implanted itself into animals hundreds of millions of years ago. That virus interfacing with the brain of that early animal is what gave memory beyond just like, goldfish memory. So that's just one example of where a virus had a very literal, very scientifically proven impact that was positive. And so, I really think that regardless of the origins of the virus, people talk about labs and that sort of thing, and intentionality and events that, certain software billionaires were at and so forth in October 2019, that sort of thing. It doesn't matter, because the universe is ultimately at the helm, and the universe is guiding our evolution. And so in part 2, I'm going to be asking Laura more about actually the astrological transit she thinks is most powerful. She kind of went into that a little bit with talking about the Pluto transits. We're going to ask Laura about what are some of the projects she's working on right now, what are some of the struggles she's had, what are some of the triumphs she's recently had, and what's lighting her up, and then just some final thoughts from Laura on what we can all do as individuals to help guide evolution back to the organic ascended master timeline and help wake others up and do our own inner work. So thank you so much for your time so far, Laura. It's been amazing.
Oh, it's been so wonderful. And I look forward to more. Okay.
All right. Great. See you in a few minutes.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.